Heyo. Good morning, all you awake people. Love it. Okay, so this is Steve. We're very excited to have him today to present the keynote. He's super active in the DevOps community, particularly in Toronto. He's on the organizing committee for DevOps Days Toronto. So if you guys are ever in the Toronto area or you live there by any chance, make sure to participate in that event. It's really great every year. And we're super excited to have him today. So welcome, Steve. Thank you.
Oh, come on. What a gorgeous sign. Thank you for tolerating my English. I'm really excited to be here. This is a fantastic venue. This team has done a fantastic job, and I really appreciate being a part of this. This is my first time at a Montreal DevOps event, and this looks like a fantastic crowd. So I'm really excited to talk to everybody later, and I hope this talk sells my workshop, because I would really like to close the loop and give everybody a really deep dive into what I'm going to be talking about. So part of this time for what's next is sort of two meanings. I like thinking of it in terms of giving yourself time to be focusing on the things that you want to be focused on. How many of us struggle to find time to do the things that we want to do at work? Almost nobody, right? Who cares? Nobody has enough to do at work. But the other side of this is I spend a lot of time thinking about the next 20 years of DevOps, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, what's coming down the pipe with DevOps. And this talk sort of introduces the things that I've become really interested in over my last, let's say, 8 years in the DevOps space, and then 20 years of tech in my career. So the reason Kramer's up on the screen, who's seen this ancient TV show called Seinfeld? Anybody familiar? A few people, one or two. It's really not super important, other than there's this fantastic episode that I love that I always sort of think about when I'm thinking about flow and thinking about getting things done. And it's because Kramer has this conversation with the team one day, and he finds out that everyone else takes a shower in 10 minutes, and it takes him an hour to take a shower every day. And he's like blown away. He can't believe that it could take anybody 10 minutes to take a shower. And it seems to me to parallel a lot of companies' experience with dealing with, like, the world where Netflix is deploying thousands and thousands of times a day, and the average company is like 3 months to do a release, right? Or 12 months to ship a feature. And how do you reconcile the two of those, right? It blows people's minds thinking of, I can't believe that they do that. They must be irresponsible cowboys just shoving things into production, right? Without testing or anything else, right? And so how do we sort of reconcile the difference between these super high performing companies and your average, let's say, Fortune 2000 company that's trying to get things done? And this isn't really getting much better. You know, we're seeing slowly things trending in the right direction, but last year there was a massive amount of money wasted on trying to do this transformation, right? Between the old way of doing things manually, doing things in big death march releases that take 12 months to ship features, and trying to move to more agile and, let's say, automated ways of doing things. And it costs a lot. It's not only $900 billion, it's also like people's jobs, and frustration and trust is lost in organizations. And that has a humongous impact on everybody. And although we're moving in the right direction, we're still wasting tons of time and effort trying to make this change. So in the DevOps world, you know, how many people have heard of the 4 key metrics coming out of Dora? Not important. But the industry has sort of settled on focus on release time and cycle time and time to get feedback, right? How quickly can you deploy software? Because that's how fast you can get results back. You can get feedback from your customers, you can get money from what you ship, and you get rid of all of your work in progress, right? You stop all this dangerous things in flight and piling up batch work to release. And we focus a lot on feedback loops and getting things out so that we can get money and feedback back. But really, what all that takes is a lot of alignment and collaboration, right? We have to work together. We have to spend a lot of time getting on the same page because now we're combining departments, right? We're combining roles into cross-functional teams and product teams and trying to mash all these different understandings and perspectives together so that we can commonly achieve a goal, right? How many companies here are in the midst of a move from projects to products? Anybody? Okay, a couple people, yeah. And I think this is becoming more and more common, right? But it's really hard because all of a sudden you've got all kinds of different roles who didn't used to talk to each other. Now they have to collaborate on a regular basis, right? In order to move things faster. Because traditionally we had not just handoffs, we had, of course, throwing things over the wall to a different department and saying, now it's your problem, right? And I find that as we move in this new direction and we have all this automation that's supporting us and all these capabilities and the ability to spin up infrastructure and automate almost everything that we're doing, we can get caught on little tiny details all the time, right? And it's easy as engineers. How often as an engineer do you get caught on a problem and dig really deep or kind of gold plate something because it feels really good to have it perfect, It feels really good to have something that's really well engineered. But meanwhile, the organization could care less about that, right? Maybe the CEO has no idea what you're even doing, and then by the time you hand it off to somebody who was asking for that or who was interested in that work, they're like, yeah, cool, like I don't care about any of this stuff, Like, that happens a lot, and as engineers, that can be hugely demoralizing, right? You spend all this time, maybe you're like working late to work on something, and then all of a sudden someone's like, no, we don't actually need that anymore, we're gonna do this. Or we're just gonna like buy this product instead of using the in-house solution, right? And it's because we sort of lose touch with this like connection between different stakeholders, different perspectives in the company. This alignment breaks down, right? So we get caught up with tools, but really I think what has the most impact in organizations is all of these handoffs that happen between different departments, different people, different roles, right? And we actually see a 7 times improvement when we focus more on the handoffs and the process rather than the tools that we're using to glue everything together, right? Optimizing some tiny piece of a pipeline isn't going to have as much of an impact as getting rid of a 4-hour meeting that you have every single week, right? And this is a common problem. So inside of most organizations, you'll have like in a typical week, you spend 15% of your time actually doing something valuable, and the rest is like coming to agreement with people and meetings, becoming like aware of things. Like someone has a meeting just to tell people something that they could have just sent in an email or in a Slack message, right? Has this ever happened to anybody? Great. Okay. So these are some of the things that I see all the time. And this is what I've become sort of obsessed with. Personally, I've kind of left the tool side of the DevOps world behind because I see so many teams struggle with this side of the business where we're doing all of our work all day, all week, all month, all year, over and over again the same way, and having all these same sort of problems pop up. And what do we do about it? There's no tool that can automate away all this stuff, and not a lot of people are talking about it, right? Especially not in the DevOps world. It's kind of like an old school businessy thing, and you have process improvement and all kinds of stuff. And this is back to Seinfeld, just because I like the look on his face. But the story behind this is, Kramer's trying to figure out how to get to the 10-minute shower, and then he kind of goes off the deep end, right? He's like, okay, instead of a 10-minute shower, why don't I just do everything in the shower, because that would be the most efficient thing that I could do, right? So he starts to figure out, like, what can I do to optimize the hell out of my shower routine? And sort of the things that I see that companies have problems with is the idea that we don't have the same view of what we should be doing. We don't share this perspective. And it's hard to get anything done because nobody owns processes at a high level. You know, you might have product owners, but are they really responsible for the way that we do work or the sequence in which things get done and tying it all together? And we can have single points of failure, that's SPOF. You know, Brent from the Phoenix Project, like the single lone savior of the organization who knows everything, and if they're sick, then nothing happens. This happens all the time, right? But how do we highlight that in a constructive way, right? You don't want to tell on them and go to management and say, like, you know, Troy's going to kill the team because he knows too much and everyone goes to him for everything, right? And coming to agreement, doing things manually, all this stuff causes a lot of problems. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so I start thinking of things in terms of streams, right? And I say streams and I say value because process doesn't inherently involve value, right? We can do all kinds of things in processes for no reason, and it doesn't have any benefit. But value stream, thinking in terms of value streams, helps focus on not only value and flow, but sustainability, not just doing something once really great, but how do we do great things constantly and continuously? And focusing on value and not just process and not just tools helps frame this in a way that we can have constructive conversations with anybody in the business, right? Because the whole business exists to generate value. And if we shouldn't be doing something, then it doesn't matter how well we do it, right? It doesn't matter what we automate if what we're automating is useless. We could just be creating more problems for ourselves, right? If you automate something you shouldn't do, you're just creating like errors as a service, which is something I heard from another DevOps days, but I love it. But it happens all the time, you know. If you do something wrong automatically, then all of a sudden you're just drowning in garbage, right? And it can happen very quickly. And so I started to become obsessed with this idea of value stream mapping. How many people have heard of value stream mapping, like outside of my talk? Okay, cool. I apologize because it's kind of a mess. It comes from manufacturing. It's hugely complicated. And so part of what I want to do today in this talk in my workshop is introduce a simpler way of thinking about this. And I really want to highlight what I see as the benefits of this, being this shared view of what's going on, the measurement behind it so that we have data to point to, and then this idea of continuous improvement and incorporating value into what we're doing instead of just performing processes and operations. So what does this do? It means that we can align our team because we can all point at a common picture and say, here's where I see the problem. Do you agree, right? Are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing? And that's really hard to do in documentations. It's really hard to do in a conversation because you can read a document from a totally different perspective and get something totally different than somebody else. You can have a conversation with someone and come away with a completely different understanding of what you just talked about, right? That happens from time to time. But it incorporates this aspect of measurement so that we can start looking at how to reduce cycle time, reduce time, get our time back for focusing on things that we want to do. And really, once you get that time back, you get to invest where you want to invest. So you can spend time on new projects, on experimentation and research. And really, the key elements that we're talking about here are steps and timing. That's it. I don't care, but all the other pieces are bonuses. There's a lot to it, but essentially, this is what's going on. You've got a sequence of events that are focused on producing customer value, and then the measurement of each piece, right? You're measuring the wait times, you're measuring the timing of each step. That's really as simple as it gets, but it's 1,000 times better than just a process sequence, because the measurement is what makes this useful. The measurement allows us to have a conversation and say that step 2 is more important than step 3. Step 2 is a bigger bottleneck for us than step 3. And that is what you get from a value stream map that you don't get from a traditional process map. And I'll go into more of this detail in my workshop, but just this idea is something that I wanted to pass on to you guys. Because this is a very weird part in the episode, and I don't have time to go into it, unfortunately. But the key is, Kramer starts measuring what's actually happening. Not only in his own, it gets creepy because he's measuring other people's shower routines, but he starts measuring his own shower routine, and that's where he gets the improvement. You can see the stopwatch, you can see the notepad. He's doing the work, right? He's looking at the process, he's measuring the bottlenecks. And this is key. Okay. So what happens when you start to do this, right? And this is my personal experience. There's a lot of examples out there of big results from this. But you start to see massive improvements. Like, for example, I had, in my previous company, we were onboarding customers, and what we had to do when we onboarded customers was take a bunch of their data and normalize it, clean it up, parse it, ingest it into our system, and then propagate a bunch of tables and databases to create basically their presence in our application, right? It was a huge, messy operation, and it took us about 6 weeks to do on average. And we brought that down to 4 days by looking at the value stream and saying, here's all the steps involved. What's actually happening is that we're handing this work from person to person, even though the same person can do steps 1 through 10. Like almost the entire process could be done by a single person as long as they were empowered to do it and said, here are the steps you need to do. Here's tooling. You can automate whatever you want to automate, but now you own this piece and you can take it all the way through. So just doing that simple step shrunk it, like that was probably 4 weeks. And then we started chipping away at the next bottleneck, right? And I'll go into this more in the workshop, but there's a sequence of events that you can follow that really carve away at this time. And what happens? It's not just timing. You can improve quality by doing this because you can see the entire process and what's getting handed from person to person and what are the expectations for the product and value at each step. Right? So you can make sure that your quality doesn't degrade from when you start the process to when you finish the process. Obviously, you get speed improvements. Capacity improvements where all of a sudden, if you have multiple people on your team that are capable of executing steps in a value stream, you can distribute the work, right? You can make sure that if you have a higher number of requests, they can be handled by more people. This is like basic systems capacity thinking, right? And all of a sudden, if somebody's away or sick or moves to another job, the whole thing doesn't fall apart, right? And having this simple picture of what's going on really helps not only managing complexity, because you can make very specific decisions about, we're going to be adding something to this step, and here's what's going to happen. Here's what might happen downstream from this. But also, like, it just gives people a simple picture when they're joining the team or having conversations with other people inside of the organization. If you have a picture that you can bring to marketing and says, we're going to start releasing our software every 3 weeks, which means that we need you to start your marketing activity at the 1 week mark here instead of here at the end of the process, right? And I've had really constructive conversations with companies where they have a huge long sequence and they finish their software release and they put it into production, and then they go and knock on the marketing team's door and say, hey, we shipped something, you should probably tell the world about it, you know? And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we'll just stay up for 48 hours and make sure that we get all this marketing material put together so that we don't look like idiots for not telling anybody about the thing that they're now seeing inside of the application, right? Happens all the time, and it's crazy, right? But I've seen so many value streams that, you get to sales and marketing and there's a big question mark because those people aren't in the room or they're not aware of the rest of the sequence, right? And so I've started to see, because I'm obsessed with this, but I'm starting to see value streams everywhere, right? I mean, a lot of my morning routine is a value stream that's somewhat optimized, somewhat micro-optimized by the fact that I wear the exact same thing every single day. But that's a micro-optimization, right? Moving closer to work so I can walk to work is a macro-optimization, right? Because I'm seeing that result every single day for as long as I live there and as long as I work in the same area, right? So I might be saving an hour every day for years by making that macro-optimization. And all this stupid stuff I do to wear the same thing every day might save me like 30 seconds a day. But maybe that cognitive load of not looking at my closet and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do, maybe that's worth it, right? And maybe that's the bottleneck that I want to address, right? So you can start to make these decisions by looking at the big picture and measuring what's going on. Because not that we don't measure our morning commutes, but when you extrapolate that over 15, 20 years, that number starts looking very interesting, right? And maybe it motivates some decisions. And we can have very interesting conversations when we have a picture that we can share with other people about it. So I see this potential everywhere. I've seen it work very successfully for things like employee onboarding, sales and marketing processes. And what that means to me is that I have a tool that allows me to speak to anybody in the organization because I can speak a common language with them. All of a sudden we have a framework by which we can all commonly align and understand each other and have productive discussions about what should we be focusing on, what should we be working on and putting our energy into, and what are the results that we expect to get. Because once you have the measurements, you know what to expect from the outcomes. And once again, I want to say, back to my earlier point, you might be saying, well, Steve, you just talked about a tool, and you were talking earlier about tools being not important. But I would say that you're very clever for noticing that. But I would also say it's important to focus in order of importance, right? And I think that value being the center of everything that we do means that we optimize for valuable outcomes and we optimize for valuable conversations. And then having process and tools follow that is really important for not only our sanity and our results, but our organizations. And I think we are now moving into this era where value will become much more important because of things like sustainability being so important, because of the things that we are now really finding critical to not only work and humanity, but if we think of things like burnout at work, right? We're starting to think about what does it take to actually maintain a velocity over a long term, right? What does it mean to optimize for the long term so that we are not just shipping something, burning out all of our staff, and then having them take 3 weeks to recover so that we can do it again, right? What is the thing that allows us to do to create value sustainably over the long term, for the indefinite long term? And that will come with this migration from projects to products, right? Everything now is becoming continuous. And sustainability, I think, is a key part of that. But sustainability without value is nothing. Value without sustainability is really nothing. So I think those areas are where we're going to see a lot of development over the next couple of years, where I hope we see a lot of development also. So to leave you, with a couple of thoughts. I think, one of the most powerful parts of value stream mapping and flow engineering is starting wherever you are, right? The messy state that you're in right now, you have to look at it. You have to illustrate that and critique it, because focusing on a roadmap and focusing on something ideal, focusing on a Netflix or a Spotify and saying we're going to be like that, is not acknowledging the problems that you have right now that are keeping you from getting there, right? And so starting with a value stream allows you to sort of look at the picture, and sometimes it's messy, but that's how you will improve, right? That gives you the starting point to move on. And then once you have that picture, you can share it with the rest of your organization. You can start to have those really valuable conversations. And focusing on bottlenecks instead of what feels like the right thing to work on, right? So that's going to steer you away from these micro optimizations and get you focused on the macro, the big picture, the things that are really going to move the needle. And of course, I also mentioned value and sustainability, but when we're talking about repetition, I think that's so important, because as these things become continuous, we will continuously realize the gains that we engineer into our processes and our flows. So of course, we get velocity, we get time out of this. You're going to have time to do new things. You're going to have time to explore and pay back all that technical debt that the organization keeps shoveling on you. But I would say focusing on value and what you're creating by all of your efforts is really the key here. And I would say that the more we have conversations about value, the more we're going to have better stories to tell, better outcomes, and better results. And that's it. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
So does anybody have any questions for Steve? Okay, I see one over there, but feel free to walk to the mics. I'm going to come to you.
This QR code is actually that, if you were hoping for two different links.
Hi. Mostly I was wondering, the numbers that came up during the talk, are they based on any research, or they're just more personal experience?
The which ones? The results numbers or the?
Mostly speed ups and in general, anytime you would say, 4 times faster, 10 times.
Oh yeah. So those are my personal results, but they echo a lot of what I've read about and what I've heard about from other people doing value stream mapping. So they're pretty common results. Like a 10 times improvement in a process after doing value stream mapping is not uncommon. But you will see like 20% just by looking at the current state map. I hear that everywhere from everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a big fan actually of the value stream mapping activity. We did once at Jesus, but my question is about, I didn't flash on the fact that maybe we should repeat it. So what would be the frequency you recommend to do it?
It's a great question. So I recommend every 6 months. I think 6 months you have enough drift between your current state and your future state. So if you're defining, here's where we want to be, giving yourself 6 months to get there and then remeasuring, I think is perfect.
Hi. I thought it was a great talk. Our company is sort of moving to start doing more of this, the value stream mapping type thing, and I was wondering what some of the common pitfalls might be that you've seen in companies doing value stream mapping.
That's a great question. So common pitfalls, I get into a little bit more detail about this in my workshop, but it's pretty common to try and bite off way more than you can chew in a single session. So you don't want to look at everything that happens in the company in sequence in order to do X, right? So let's say you have a new toy that you're shipping for the holiday season. that might be like a 5,000 step value stream, right? You don't want to be looking at it at that detail level. So sometimes it can be valuable to do really high level and then dive in. Like I have a client next week, and what we're doing first, because I'm not familiar with their business, coming in from the outside, is to do a high level that's maybe, you want to be focused on like 10 to 15 steps, and then you can dive in further detail once you realize, okay, here's where I think we should focus, right? And then you sort of run the value stream as an experiment inside of that, like zooming in. But I've heard of people doing 2,000 step value stream maps, and it just sounds like a nightmare to me. I wouldn't recommend it. So keeping it small means that you have faster iteration, and you can really like make the choice to deliberately dig into a specific chunk.
Awesome, thank you. Does anybody have, oh, you have one? Perfect.
My question is about how to get buy-in from upper management. So what are your thoughts about different tools out there that we can use to measure the current state of the process stream so that we can get buy-in from upper management to say, hey, look, this is where we are right now from a metrics perspective, and have some solid numbers to say, hey, let's go to value stream mapping?
I would say, I mean, starting with tools is challenging. Like, what I find works really well is to start with the picture, you know, like just a rough value stream map to start a conversation, because the tooling isn't there. There's no tooling for this. I don't actually need it, I find. Like, I do a lot of my work on a whiteboard, and then I digitize it, and I just use draw.io or Google Drawings or whatever. It really doesn't matter. But having that picture allows you to go to leadership and say, here's where I think, so you just roughly estimate, right? So draw it out from your understanding, and maybe you get some input from peers, right? Draw out like a really rough version with some guess estimations, because detail and accuracy don't really matter, right? When you're getting a rough idea. And then you have something to bring to leadership and say, here's what I think is worth a second look. Here's where I think we should maybe spend some time to investigate. And then you can have a let's say, productive conversation about, I agree, I disagree. You know, like, I don't see it, right? But having that illustration with the measurements means that it's a lot easier to come to an agreement that, like, 2 weeks is larger than 2 days, right? And maybe 2 weeks needs to happen, but maybe 2 weeks doesn't need to happen. And so that sort of forms the foundation for that conversation with leadership.
Great.
All right, I have one last here.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Steve, for this great talk.
Thank you.
My question is about the prerequisites. What are the preparatory steps that needs to be done before doing the VSM, like value stream mapping exercise? Because I think if you want to have like accurate data and we want to have everyone involved and contribute to optimizing the flow, we need to prepare the ground for this environment, this climate to happen. So what are the checklists needs to be there? Is there like any readiness to measure to see if the company is ready for the VSM or not, something like that?
That's a great question. I would say that there's very little that actually needs to happen, which is why I'm kind of a big fan of the approach. Because I find that a lot of stuff that we do in DevOps, if we want to make a big impact, we need a lot of the groundwork to be in place, right? You need the culture to be there. Really, to run a productive value stream mapping exercise, you need someone who's able to make a decision about the process, to change the process, right? So you need some kind of leadership or ownership stakeholder involved if you want it to result in any action. Sometimes you just want to paint the picture, right? So you don't necessarily need that person. But then what's absolutely essential is that you need the people who are familiar with the process as it is, right? So as long as you have those people and they are bought in, which means that you might be approaching people who complain about the process, who might be getting poor quality outcomes from the process, right? You can try and target those people who are looking for change, who are looking for improvement, and involve them first, right? Because they can be great assets for you, and help move things along. But once you have that people who can build the vision, build the map for you, that's really all you need to get started. It's good to have context, but like sometimes it's good to not have context. Like I go into companies totally from the outside, and it benefits everybody because I don't have any bias, I don't have any agenda. You know, there's no politics from my end that's saying, you know, I'm going to cast judgment on you for your, you know, your messy process. And coming in like totally ignorant is actually an asset, because then I can ask questions that other people can't ask, right? A lot of people, it's uncomfortable to ask, why do we even do this, right? How many people would feel comfortable like standing up in a meeting with leadership and being like, do we really need to do this thing? Like, or I wonder how useful this is, right? But I can do it because I come in as an idiot from outside and say like, why do you do this thing? What is this for, right? So it can be good to not have a bunch of prerequisites in place.
Thank you. Hey. So can we all give a round of applause to Steve?
Oh. Thank you.
This is for you.
Oh, thank you.